Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ray Kurzweil.
Well, that's a little better. At least I can see your eyes towering over you. But it's a pleasure to be here. It's a great honor to receive this distinction. And I've greatly enjoyed my visit here. UAT that we're in is quite a unique institution. I mentioned at the commencement last night that I was speaking to the students and asking them what they were studying, and I got answers like computer games, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, computer games, neural networks, biotechnology, computer games. And I don't usually get answers like that. It's really quite refreshing, because these, of course, are my own interests, but they also reflect the fields that are going to shape our future world. And I'd like to reflect some insights that I've gained in studying technology trends over the last 3 decades with you. And I actually got into this because of my interest in being an inventor. Decided I would be an inventor when I was 5. And I remember the feeling I had that if you put things together in just the right way, and I was a collector at 5 of all kinds of odd little objects that I could assemble, including erector set parts. And if you put them together in just the right way, you could create transcendent effects. Well, I didn't have that vocabulary, but I can remember the feeling. And the transcendent effects that you can create are actual changes in people's lives, and that's actually what's gratifying to an inventor. It's very nice to be recognized. It's helpful, in fact, in gaining the resources to do further projects. But what the real goal is to not just to give a demo of a cool technology, but to people actually use it and have it change their lives. And so that's what's been gratifying in my career. But I quickly realized, I'd say over 3 decades ago, that the key to being successful as an inventor was timing. And most inventors get their gadgets to work. We now do some mentoring and early stage investing, and I would say 95% of the plans we get, these groups would build exactly what they say if given the resources, but 95% of those projects would still fail because the enabling factors that are necessary for it to succeed in the marketplace would not be in place when they're needed. And realizing this, I began to actually study that issue. And being an engineer, I gathered a lot of data, and I made a very interesting discovery, which I was not expecting. The common wisdom is you can't predict the future. But I found that if you can measure the underlying information properties of a technology, it follows exquisitely predictable trajectories. And it really belies that common wisdom. So if you ask me, will the price of Google be higher or lower than it is today, 3 years from now? That's hard to predict. Will a specific drug trial company succeed or fail? That's hard to predict. Will the students at UAT be successful? That's easy to predict. But if you ask me, what will the cost of a MIPS of computing be in 2012, or the cost of sequencing a base pair of DNA in 2014, or the spatial resolution of brain scanning in 2016, or the number of bits we're moving around on the internet in 2018, I can give you a figure, and it's likely to be correct because I've been making these kinds of forward-looking predictions for 30 years, and I'm not just looking backwards and overfitting to past data. These kinds of measures of information technology are amazingly predictable. And what's predictable is that they grow in an exponential fashion. And that exponential progress has continued for the entire 20th century, for example, in the case of computation, through thick and thin, through war and peace, through boom times and recessions, even through the Great Depression. It is continuing without batting an eye through the current economic downturn. And I'll show you just how smooth and predictable these progressions are. And the progression, as I mentioned, is exponential. And yet our intuition about the future is not exponential, it's linear. In fact, that's hardwired in our brains. When we walked through the savannah 1,000 years ago and we saw something coming at us through the corner of our eye, we made a linear prediction about where that animal would be and what to do about it, and that worked just fine, and that became hardwired in our brains. But the actual trajectory of information technology is exponential. And there's a very profound difference between a linear extrapolation and an exponential one. And that's why my predictions very often seem to be quite startling to people who are thinking in a linear manner. If I take 30 steps linearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I get to 30. If I take 30 steps exponentially, 2, 4, 8, 16, I get to 1 billion. It makes an enormous difference. And this is what we've already experienced. When I was an undergraduate at MIT, I went there because MIT was so advanced at that time that it actually had its own computer. Most colleges didn't have one. And it took up half a building. You needed influence to get a few seconds of time on it. Well, the computer in your cell phone today is 1 million times smaller than that computer, 1 million times cheaper, and 1,000 times more powerful. That's a billion-fold increase in price performance, the amount of computation you get per dollar compared to when I was an undergraduate. And it's also shrunk in size 100,000-fold. And what used to fit in the building now fits in your pocket and is a lot more powerful. And what now fits in your pocket will fit in a blood cell 25 years from now. The rate of exponential growth is itself slowly increasing. So we'll multiply the power of computers for the same cost another billion-fold in the next 25 years. And that's going to make a profound difference in what we are capable of doing. And it will fit inside a blood cell. And we've already seen that kind of progress. And it's not just the computer gadgets. It's not just Moore's Law that many of you have heard about. It really applies to any technology where we can measure the information properties. I mean, take the Genome Project. That was not a mainstream project when it was announced in 1990. It was kind of a renegade project, and mainstream scientists were skeptics and said, there's no way you're going to collect the whole human genome in 15 years. We just had our best graduate students, our most advanced equipment around the world, and in 1989 we collected 1/10,000th of the genome. This is going to take centuries. Halfway through the project, the skeptics were still going strong, saying, I told you this wasn't going to work. Here you are halfway through the project, and you've only finished 1% of the project. It's going to take a century. But that was right on schedule for an exponential progression. You start out doubling tiny numbers. By the time you get to 1%, you're only 7 doublings away from 100%. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. It continued to double every year. It was finished 7 years later, a year ahead of schedule, and it's continued to double ever since. I'll show you the chart. It's not some kind of erratic curve where it sort of approximately doubles every year. It was exactly doubling every year. The cost came down by half every year. It was $10 per base pair in 1990. It's a small fraction of a penny today. The first genome cost $1 billion. We're close to a $1,000 genome. It applies to bits on the internet. I saw the internet, which was then called the ARPANET, doubling every year in the early 80s, but it was only serving a few thousand scientists. But doubling every year means multiplying by 1,000 in 10 years. So I predicted that this would be a World Wide Web connecting hundreds of millions of people to each other and to knowledge bases around the world, emerging by the mid-1990s, and I predicted that in the early 80s. And that was heavily criticized as being ridiculous and overly optimistic when the entire defense budget could only tie together a few thousand scientists. People are just not able to think in exponential terms. But it happened right on schedule. I saw the chess supercomputers doubling in power every year, and that added a certain number of points to the chess score, and so I put the crossover in 1998, so I predicted that a computer would take the World Chess Championship by then. That seemed ridiculous in the 80s when an average chess player could beat the best chess machines. Kasparov was asked about this in 93, and he scoffed and said, there's no way they'll ever touch me. I've played the best chess machines in the world, and they're pathetic, they're predictable, they're brittle, they'll never touch me. And that was understandable in 93. They defeated him in 97. And so we were just talking at the table about energy. I just completed writing the nation's energy plan for the National Academy of Engineering with Larry Page. And we were asked to study all the different emerging technologies, and we chose solar energy because it is growing at an exponential pace. You might not think of it as an information technology, but we're applying nanotechnology, which is reorganizing matter and energy at the level of molecules using information processes. And we're applying that to solar panels. So the cost per watt is coming down very quickly, and the amount of solar energy is on an exponential. It's doubling, not every year, every 2 years, but it's done that for 20 years. It's doubled 10 times already. And it's only 8 doublings away from meeting 100% of our energy needs. And people tend to dismiss technologies when they're only 1% of a solution. It's just a fringe player. The internet is only serving a few tens of thousands of people. The genome is only 1%. And they ignore the exponential progression. And solar right now is 0.5%. Fringe player, not important, but it's doubling every 2 years. And it's within 16 years, it can meet 100% of our energy needs. And then you might say, well, is there really enough sunlight to do that? There's actually 10,000 times more than we need. We only need to capture 1 part in 10,000, and that's really why we chose solar, because it has a lot of headroom. And we're also making progress in storing the energy because of the intermittency of sunlight, but that's an exponential progression. Perhaps the most important industry which has switched from not being an information technology to now being one is health and medicine. That was not an information technology just a few years ago. Basically, it was hit or miss. So we would just find things accidentally. We didn't really know why they worked. For example, they were testing out this blood pressure medication. It worked a little bit, but not really well enough, so they stopped the trial and they asked the test subjects to send the medication back. All the women sent it back, the men did not. So the pharmaceutical company found this curious and they looked into it, and that's how Viagra was discovered. And that's how medications have been developed. Drug development was called drug discovery. Well, now we can actually design these interventions on computers. We can test them out on biological simulators. We have the genome, which, as I mentioned, was an exponential progress in and of itself, which is the software of life. I mean, we have 23,000 little software programs inside our body that control our biology. Now, I mean, how long do you go without updating the software on your cell phone? I mean, it updates itself wirelessly every few days. Yet we have this software in our bodies that hasn't been updated for thousands, in some cases millions of years. And it's out of date, it's obsolete. It evolved during a completely different era. And I'll give you an example of one gene we'd like to change that has already been experimented with. The fat insulin receptor gene says, hold on to every calorie, because the next hunting season may not work out so well. And that was a very good idea 1,000 years ago. Calories are few and far between. You worked hard to get them. There were no refrigerators, so you stored them in the fat cells of your body. In fact, it's an ancient gene that allows animals to roam around. Plants don't have a fat insulin receptor gene. And so when that gene was, but right now that underlies an epidemic of obesity. So it was experimented at the Joslin Diabetes Center with animals to turn this gene off. And these animals ate ravenously and they remained slim. And it wasn't a fake slimness. They didn't get diabetes, they didn't get heart disease, they lived 20% longer, they got the health benefits of caloric restriction while doing the opposite. And there are several pharmaceutical companies rushing to bring fat insulin receptor gene inhibitors to the human market. And that's what we really want in a diet drug. Most diet drugs work today by inhibiting appetite. It's a little bit like a birth control pill that works by inhibiting interest in sex. It's not what we want. We want to be able to eat and have our bodies retain the calories that it really needs. And that's just one of the 23,000 genes we'd like to experiment with, we'd like to modify. And we have now technologies that can change our genes. RNA interference can turn genes off. New forms of gene therapy can add new genes. I'm involved with a project where we take cells out of the body, in this case lung cells, add a new gene in vitro. This overcomes the traditional problem with gene therapy that it would trigger the immune system. We can now inspect it on a new microscope. That's another new technology. See that it got put in the right place, in the right chromosome. Once it's been inspected, we multiply it 1 million-fold. That's another new technology. So now we have 1 million cells with your DNA, but with a new gene added, inject them back into the body, goes through the bloodstream, and ends up back in the lungs. This has cured a fatal disease called pulmonary hypertension, and it's undergoing human trials. There are thousands of drugs and other processes in the development and testing pipeline where we are changing your genetic profile, turning genes off with RNA interference, adding new genes with these forms of gene therapy, or modifying other aspects of the information processes underlying biology. So we'll have not just designer babies, but designer baby boomers, which personally I'm much more interested in. And this is the nature of being human. People say, well, if we keep changing ourselves, are we going to lose our humanity? No, our humanity is defined by changing ourselves. And if we didn't do that, most of us wouldn't be here. The younger members of the group here would be senior citizens. Life expectancy was 23 1,000 years ago. That was in the interest of the human species. Once we're 23 and we're done raising your kids, who are 12 and ready to go off on their own, you're just using up the precious resources of the tribe. So that was really in our interest. Human life expectancy was 37 in 1800. There was no sanitation, no antibiotics, no understanding of the germ theory of disease. Schubert and Mozart died in their 30s, and that was typical. So health and medicine has just become an information technology. It's in an early stage, but now that it is an information technology, it will be subject to what I call the law of accelerating returns, which is a doubling of the power of these technologies every year. It's already come an enormous way since the collection of the genome 5 years ago. And 10 years from now, these technologies will be 1,000 times more powerful. They'll be 1,000,000 times more powerful within 20 years, and it will be a very different era. But people don't think this way. I've had debates with many sophisticated scientists, like a neuroscientist a few months ago, who said he's been studying this one ion channel in this dendrite, and he thinks he's modeled about 1% of that dendrite over the last year. So this will take a century. It's if nothing is going to happen in the next 100 years, despite the fact that we're doubling the power of the computers to simulate these processes every year. We're doubling the spatial resolution of brain scanning every year. We're doubling the amount of data we're getting every year. We're doubling the precision of the models and simulations based on this data every year. But it'll take 100 years because he just finished 1% over the past year. And as I say, this is hardwired, but it's not historically correct. If you look at computation, I'll show you that chart. It's been smooth, exponential progression. We've made progress trillions-fold in the power of the computers per dollar. And you know, when I was an undergraduate, they were across campus. Now they're in our pockets, and we can take out a device and access all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. And ultimately, these technologies are very widespread. People ask about the have-have-not divide. You know, isn't it going to be only the wealthy that have access to these technologies? And I say, yeah, like cell phones, right? I mean, half the farmers in China have cell phones, and they're not just phones. I mean, they are powerful computation communication devices that allow them to access all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. They're ubiquitous in Africa. It is spawning a true cultural revolution in China, which I just saw a few months ago. So these technologies, by the time they work well, are actually very widespread. So I got into this because of timing my own technology projects. It does have a side benefit in that I can now anticipate where technology will be 10, 20, 30 years ago. The predictions I made 20 or 30 years ago have tracked extremely well because these aspects of information technology are remarkably predictable and have tracked for many decades, going back to the 1890 American census. But the primary application, so those long-term predictions have been the basis of the scenarios in my books, but I still use this technology of forecasting primarily to time my own technology projects. I have a group now of 10 people that help me track technology and model different fields, and we continue to refine these models. But I'll give you one example of this phenomena. So I've been involved with reading machines for the blind for the last 35 years. This is what it looked like in the 1970s. It was the size of a washing machine. This was the first CCD flatbed scanner the first text-to-speech synthesis, and the first omni-font or any type font optical character recognition. It was an expensive, big device, and people would have to go to a library or a school to use it. Stevie Wonder did have one, and that started my friendship with him, which led me to found a music synthesis company with him. And over the years, in keeping with this law of accelerating returns, they've gotten better, cheaper, and smaller. But in 2002, it was still a device that sat on your desk. So if you were a blind student or a dyslexic student, and we had hundreds of thousands of users, you had to bring your reading material back to your desk to read it. And there's a lot of reading material as you go through the day that you can't or don't want to bring back to your desk, like a sign on a wall or the bank ATM display. You can bring the menu from the restaurant back to your desk, but you really want to read it in the restaurant. So over the years, I was predicting in speeches to Technology Disabilities Conference that someday a blind person will be able to just take a device out of their pocket and read all the printed material as they go through the day. So in 2002, Dr. Mark Maurer, the president of the National Federation of the Blind, who had actually worked with me on this device, said, "Ray, you've been making this prediction for many years. When is this going to be possible?" And I said, well, according to our models of portable cameras, portable computers, cell phones, we'll have the requisite hardware to support this application in 6 years, 2008, second quarter to be exact. And he said, okay, how long will it take to develop the software? I said, well, we have to do more than just put the optical character recognition and speech synthesis into the cell phone. We need a new layer of intelligent software because as the blind person holds the device, there's going to be 3 different degrees of freedom of tilt, rotation. There's going to be uneven illumination because you don't have the control illumination of a scanner. Images are going to be curved. They're going to be distorted because of the low-quality lenses. I mentioned 7 or 8 vagaries of images captured that way. We're going to have to guide the blind person as to where the print is. He said, okay, I understand. How long will that take? And I said, 6 years. So he said, okay, let's get started. So we started in 2002. There was, in fact, a lot of skepticism that this would be available in 6 years. You know, standing now, it seems like, well, of course it would be available. But back then, it looked quite daunting. And people said, well, it's going to be 20 years, 30 years. So we started developing it, even though the hardware to support the application was nowhere in sight. Right on schedule, spring of 2008, cell phones that could support this application became available. A little bit to my surprise, we actually got the software done on time. And we introduced this product, and there's now thousands of blind guys and gals and dyslexic students walking around snapping pictures of signs on the wall and handouts at meetings and reading the print as they go through the day. And our competitors have noticed, oh, cell phones can support this application. They started to work on it, and even if they're a lot faster than we were, they're going to miss the window of opportunity. So that was actually a comment I made to the students graduating last night, is to really plan your project not for the world that you see, but for the world that will exist 3 or 4 years from now when you finish your project. And it will be a very different world because the pace of change is accelerating because of this exponential growth. I mean, think back to when the students who graduated last night started as freshmen. Social networks, wikis, blogs were not extensively used, let alone tweets. Think back to when they started high school 7 or 8 years ago. Most people didn't use search engines. Imagine life without search engines. That sounds like ancient history. That was 7 or 8 years ago. The pace of change is really continuing to accelerate. Nobody had cell phones 7 or 8 years ago. Think back 10 years ago, if someone took out a mobile phone in a movie, that was a signal from the director that this person's a member of the power elite, because you get to be very wealthy to have one of these satellite phones, and they didn't work very well. So the world will be a different place, but you really can anticipate what it will be like, and you should plan your projects to kind of meet that moving train. So let me give you a little demonstration of how this works. And in addition to being a reading machine, it reads in 16 different languages. It can translate from one language to another, and I'll show you that. And it can also do a lot of other things.
Hello, I'm the K-Reader Mobile.
It's a navigation system for the blind. It can recognize indoor scenes, objects. We have some experimental face recognition software. It's also a phone. So I'll tell her we're reading
Settings
English.
loaded. Viewfinder on. Ready to shoot. Taking picture.
It will guide the blind
Reprocessing
person
picture in books,
where the
articles, and
print
labels
is. So
format.
if they're cutting off the left side of a page, it'll tell them to move to the
Camera
left.
is 1 degrees counterclockwise relative to
So
the
it was
page.
rotated, it'll rotate it any amount. And it displays on the camera what it's reading with synchronized highlighting for dyslexic
The
students.
University of Advancing Technology is a unique, technology-infused private college that was founded by a techno-geek for techno-geeks. Our mission is to educate students in the fields of advancing technology to become innovators of the future. UAT's campus culture is devoted to continually nurturing a thriving geek community where everyone's personal lives and professional aspirations revolve around technology. Canceling. Please wait. Processing canceled.
So I'll tell her now that we're going to read
Settings loaded.
Spanish,
Ready to shoot.
and I'll read this document and then we'll translate it into English.
Taking picture. Pre-processing picture in books, articles, and labels format. Camera is 1 degrees counterclockwise relative to the page.
Hello, I'm the K Reader Mobile.
Settings loaded. Viewfinder on. Ready to shoot. Taking picture. Pre-processing picture in books, articles, and labels format.
We are creating an application for travelers.
Camera is 0
that will do
degrees
this
clockwise
translation.
relative to the page.
Singularidad tecnológica de Wikipedia, la enciclopedia libre. En futurología, la singularidad tecnológica, algunas veces llamada.
Okay, well,
Translation.
I'll tell it to translate, and we'll specify English. It can read 16 languages and translates into any other language.
Technological singularity from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. In futurology, the technological singularity, sometimes called simply the singularity, is a future event in which it is predicted that technological progress and societal change accelerate due to the development of superhuman intelligence.
So that's the
Canceling.
translation.
Please wait.
Thanks.
Processing canceled.
So let me show you just a few examples of how pervasive this exponential growth is and how predictable it is and how it's transforming one industry after another. Ultimately, everything will be infused with information technology and transformed by it. And we have hundreds of graphs like this, but I'll give you a few examples. The paradigm shift rate is itself accelerating. It's doubling every decade. These are logarithmic graphs. As you go up the graph, each level represents an order of magnitude greater level than the level below it. So every level is 10 times greater or 100 times greater than the level below it. A straight line on a logarithmic graph represents exponential growth. So this is the adoption of the telephone. That took 50 years to be adopted by a quarter of the US population. Cell phone did that in 7 years. Telephone, radio, television, took decades to be adopted. I have a whole theory of evolution as to why this is the case, and it really applies both to biological evolution and technological evolution. In fact, technological evolution is an outgrowth of the biological evolution that led to the technology creating species. And the reason that an evolutionary process accelerates and the products of that process grow exponentially in power is because it evolves a capability, adopts that capability, and so the next stage uses the fruits of the previous stage. So this is a double logarithmic graph. On the x-axis, it's how many years ago this paradigm shift took place in powers of 10. On the y-axis, it's how long it took for that paradigm shift to occur in powers of 10. So the very first paradigm shift, biology itself, life, DNA, so that biology had an information backbone to keep track of its experiments, that took 1 billion years. But then biological evolution adopted that and used it ever since. So the next stage, the Cambrian explosion, when all the body plans of the animals evolved, went 100 times faster. And biological evolution kept building on itself, growing in complexity, getting faster and faster. Homo sapiens evolved in only a few 100,000 years. It's really a blink of an eye in biological evolutionary terms. And then adopting a technology creating species, the next stage, human-directed technological and cultural evolution, again went a little bit faster. It only took tens of thousands of years for stone tools, fire, the wheel. And then we always use the latest technology to create the next, and so technology has accelerated. Half a millennium ago, it took a century for the printing press to be adopted. First computers were actually designed pen on paper and wired with screwdrivers and took years. Now we use 12th generation computer-assisted design to design new computers, and it can be done in a few days. In fact, this university started by basically teaching computer-assisted design. So this forms a straight line on this double logarithmic graph showing the continual acceleration of paradigm shift and technological evolution emerging smoothly out of biological evolution. Now, some people criticize this graph saying, well, Kurzweil only put points on the graph if they fit on the straight line. If I had a paradigm shift that didn't fit on the straight line, I didn't bother to include it. So to address that, I took 15 different lists from 15 different thinkers and reference works: Carl Sagan's Cosmic Calendar, American Museum of Natural History, Encyclopedia Britannica, and they weren't trying to either make or break my point. This is just what they thought were the key events in biological and technological evolution. And you can see there is some disagreement. Some people include the ARPANET with the internet, so it's 25 years, not 10 years. Some people think the Cambrian explosion took 25 million years, not 10 million years. There's a lot of disagreement when human language started, both spoken and written. So you see some spreading of the points, but you see a very clear trend line. There's a very clear acceleration that's undeniable, no matter what list you take. Nobody thinks the internet took 1 million years. Nobody thinks the Cambrian explosion happened in 10 years. Not much happened in 1 million years, 1 billion years ago. So there's a very clear acceleration in this evolutionary process. So this exponential growth we see now in information technology really stems from an ancient process. And here I illustrate the difference between a linear and an exponential progression. And they are confused at first. They start out looking very similar, but ultimately the exponential radically diverges. And another objection that people make is, well, Kurzweil takes these exponentials and just projects them out, and we all know exponential growth can't go on forever. If you have 2 rabbits in Australia, you get 4 rabbits, 8 rabbits, 16 rabbits. But finally, that exponential growth comes to a halt when they eat up all the foliage. And indeed, we see that in information technology as well. Each paradigm brings exponential growth, but is dependent on some resources, and ultimately those resources run out of steam. But what happens in information technology, as we see the end of the line coming for the end of a particular paradigm, creates research pressure to create the next paradigm, and the next paradigm is there in time. Here I put 60 famous computers on a logarithmic scale. Every level on this scale is 10,000 times greater than the level below it. So this is compressing a great deal of progress. This represents trillions-fold improvement in the amount of computation per dollar. And this goes through 5 different paradigms. On the lower left-hand corner is the data processing equipment that was used in the 1890 census, the first American census to be automated. They used these old punch card machines. They were subsequently shipped to the Florida Election Commission. And the fact that people still laugh at that joke, despite the fact that Florida has now been through 2 elections where they did a good job, shows you it takes a long time to live down a bad reputation. 1940s, Alan Turing and his British colleagues cracked the German Enigma code with computers built from telephone relays. A lot of interesting literature as to how Churchill and Roosevelt had to very carefully and sometimes ignore that information so as not to tip off the enemy that the code had been cracked. But then in the Battle of Britain, they used it without reservation, so the 3-to-1 outnumbered Royal Air Force was able to win that key battle and provide a launching pad for our D-Day invasion. 1950s, CBS predicted the election of Eisenhower, the first time the networks did that with a computer based on vacuum tubes. And then they were shrinking the vacuum tubes. Every year they made them smaller and smaller to keep this exponential growth going. That finally hit a wall. They got to a point where they couldn't shrink the vacuum tube anymore and keep the vacuum, and that was the end of the shrinking of vacuum tubes. It was not the end of the exponential growth of computing. It just went on to the 4th paradigm, transistors, and then the 5th paradigm, which is Moore's law. But this exponential growth of computing started decades before Gordon Moore was even born. And I mean, this represents trillions-fold improvement, but look at how smooth and predictable a trajectory this is. This is not some tabletop experiment or some government-mandated project. This is the measure of what millions of people have done over a century. And you get this very predictable trajectory through thick and thin, through war and peace, 2 world wars, the Cold War, the Great Depression. Nothing had any effect on this progression. And I don't want to dwell on these examples of electronics, but this is an interesting chart. When I was growing up as a student in Queens, New York, I would go into Manhattan and buy something about this big. I would hang out at the surplus electronics shops, which is still there. And it was a telephone relay that could switch 1 bit, and it cost about $50. Come 1968, I could buy a transistor that was smaller, easier to use, faster, that did the same thing for $1. Today, you can buy $500 million for $1. Okay, you've heard these fantastic comparisons of how far we've come, but, I mean, look at how predictable a trajectory this is. This is not some, tabletop experiment. This is a measure of millions of people all over the world, and look at how predictable it is. And I'm saying this now not just looking backwards and overfitting to this data. I've been making these forward-looking predictions, and they continue to track extremely accurately. The charts in my book, Singularities Near, it's a 2005 book. They go up through 2002. We just updated these through 2008, and they continue to track. I mean, all these charts have just been updated. I was asked, aren't you nervous? Maybe you don't control this data. Maybe it kind of veered off the trajectory this time. But I was quite confident that it would continue to reflect this. But it really is amazing, if you think about it, how predictable a phenomena this is, despite the fact that it's, kind of a disorganized effort of millions of people. And as we've made the transistors cheaper, they're better because they're smaller, so therefore there's electrons have less distance to travel, so they're faster. So the cost of a transistor cycle, which is a real measure of price performance, doubles every year. What does that mean? That's a 50% deflation rate. And depending on what week it is, the economists worry about inflation or deflation. They're back on deflation because we're seeing deflation, and we had massive deflation during the American Depression. But that deflation and the deflation we're seeing now in this severe recession has to do with the collapse of demand. This deflation has to do with an improvement in price performance. But the concern is, as everything becomes information technology, and I do mean everything, because when we get to the 2020s, we'll have desktop nanofactories that can print out physical objects. I mean, right now, if I wanted to send you a movie or a sound recording or a book, I can send you an email attachment. A few years ago, I'd have to send you a FedEx package. In the future, I can send you an email attachment, and you'll use your desktop nanofactory to reassemble molecular fragments into a wide range of physical products, like a blouse or a solar panel or a module to build housing. and really the physical things in our lives will largely become information-based, just like information products like movies are today. And the concern is if you can get twice as much information technology year after year for the same price, people aren't going to actually double their consumption of these information products year after year. They'll increase it somewhat, but then the size of the economy as measured in constant currency will shrink, and for a variety of actually good reasons, that would not be a good thing. But that's actually not what we see. What we see is that we actually more than double our consumption year after year. We've had 18% growth per year in constant dollars over the last 50 years in every form of information technology, despite the fact you can get twice as much of it every year for the same price. And the reason for that is as price performance reaches certain levels, whole new applications just explode on the landscape that weren't cost-effective before. People didn't buy iPods for $10,000 each, which is what it would have cost 15 years ago. And so we actually double our consumption. NIH is now collecting 1 million genomes to relate genes to disease states. They wouldn't do that if they cost $1 billion each, which is what the first one did. And the biotechnology revolution, I mentioned that it's first of all a big industry. It's $2 trillion a year just in the United States, and it's deeply important to all of us. And we see exponential growth in every aspect of it. DNA sequencing costs has come down by half every year. It's continued to. This slope on this logarithmic scale represents a smooth doubling every year the amount of genetic data we're sequencing. Communication technologies, many different ways to measure this, but every aspect of it is growing exponentially, the number of bits being moved around on the internet. And this is deeply democratizing. I wrote in my first book in the 80s, The Age of Intelligent Machines, that the Soviet Union, which was then going strong, was doomed because of this emerging decentralized electronic communication that would break the back of totalitarian control. And that's indeed what we saw in the 1991 coup against Gorbachev. And it really underlied, the rise of the internet underlied the rise of democracies during the 1990s. And this is the graph I had in the 1980s. Well, I had the first few points on the left, and I projected this out, and I predicted a World Wide Web emerging in the mid-1990s. If you look at this same data on a linear scale, it looks like this. So to the casual observer, it looked like the World Wide Web came out of nowhere in the mid-1990s, but you could see it coming if you looked at the exponential trajectory. We're shrinking technology, both electronic and mechanical, at a rate of 100 in 3D volume per decade. And some of these systems that were anticipated in Eric Drexler's pioneering book of 20 years ago, Engines of Creation, which founded the nanotechnology field, which is a major area of study here at University of Advancing Technology, are now being built and are actually working. And one of the primary applications is, again, health and medicine. And if I were to say, well, someday you'll have millions of blood cell-sized devices, nanobots, nanorobots, in your bloodstream, going through your bloodstream, keeping you healthy from inside, you'd say, well, that sounds awfully futuristic. I point out there's already 50 experiments in animals today with the first generation of nano-engineered devices that are the size of blood cells. One scientist cured type 1 diabetes in rats with a blood cell-sized device that lets insulin out in a controlled fashion and blocks antibodies. At MIT, they have a blood cell-sized device that can detect cancer cells based on the antigens on their surface, latch onto them and destroy them. This is a design of a robotic red blood cell that was designed on the West Coast, and it stores and releases oxygen and carbon dioxide just like a real biological red blood cell. And it brings up an interesting observation about biology. Biology is very clever, very intricate, but it's also very suboptimal compared to what we can engineer with nanotechnology once we reverse engineer biology. And a conservative analysis of these resporocytes, robotic red blood cells, indicates if you were to replace a portion of your red blood cells with these little robots, you could do an Olympic sprint for 15 minutes without taking a breath, or sit at the bottom of your pool for 4 hours. So, honey, I'm in the pool will take on a whole new significance. And I was recently interviewed by ESPN, and they said, we're going to ban these, right? And I said, well, we should ban steroids because steroids are bad for your health, and if you don't ban them, you're forcing athletes to do something that's bad for their health in order to be competitive. And so that happens anyway, but these are actually good for your health. They'll lead to better oxygenation of your tissues and many other benefits. If you ban them, you'll be forcing athletes to not take advantage of a health technology. And besides, you'll have high school students in their gymnasiums routinely outperforming the Olympic athletes. So we'll have plenty of computation as we go through the 21st century to do things like simulate the brain. But where will we get the software? And sometimes people very often ask, well, whatever happened to artificial intelligence anyway? And it reminds me of people that go into the rainforest and say, where are all the species that are supposed to be here when there's 25 species of ants within 50 feet of them, but they don't see them because they're hidden in the ecostructure. And AI, artificial intelligence, is all around us today, but it's hidden in our modern economic infrastructure. Every time you connect a cell phone call or send an email, intelligent algorithms route the information, get an electrocardiogram, it comes back with an automated diagnosis that rivals that of doctors. Intelligent algorithms fly and land airplanes, help design products with computer-assisted design, control inventory levels with just-in-time inventory systems, assemble products in robotic factories. I could list 100 other applications of artificial intelligence today. If all the AI in the world stopped tomorrow, you couldn't get money from your bank, communication, transportation would stop. That was not the case as recently as 15 years ago. These were research projects. So we are making progress. These are software programs doing what used to be done by intelligent human activity. And what's driving this now is really our increasing understanding of the human brain. There's a grand project by 50,000 neuroscientists, engineers, to model and simulate and understand, reverse engineer the human brain, and that's providing the software algorithmic insights into human intelligence. And we're doubling the spatial resolution of brain scanning every year, we're doubling the amount of data we're getting on the brain every year, and we're showing we can turn this data into working models and simulations. There's already 25 regions of the brain that have been modeled and simulated on a computer, like the auditory cortex, the visual cortex, the cerebellum, which is an important region, comprises more than half the neurons in the brain. This has been modeled and simulated. This is responsible for our skill formation, like catching a fly ball. We always wondered, how does that work? I mean, what the kid sees is the ball going up in the air, and she moves her hand like this. In order to make that connection between what you see and how you move your hand, you need to solve a dozen simultaneous differential equations. And most 10-year-olds haven't taken calculus. So how do they do that? Well, those equations are actually solved by the cerebellum, and we have figured that out and modeled it and simulated and tested those simulations. And all of this is gearing up exponentially. This is driving economic growth. You see a little dip from the Great Depression and then a little blip from the World War II. Otherwise, you can hardly notice the recessions. But there's been exponential growth, even on a per capita basis. Labor productivity, because of information technology, has gone from $30 to $130 per hour in constant dollars over the last 45 years, in smooth exponential growth. And the adoption of these technologies is exponential. Here's e-commerce, now $2 trillion, on its way to becoming the largest nation in the world, if it were a nation. But it actually has no concept of national boundaries. Now, you might say, now, wait a second. Wasn't there a boom and a bust in these dot-coms? How come we don't see that? Well, that was a Wall Street phenomenon, not a Main Street phenomenon. The internet was growing exponentially, and Wall Street looked at it in the 1990s and said, wow, this is going to change everything. This is going to take every business model and turn it on its head. And that was true, but it wasn't going to do it overnight. If you remember my internet graph, it took a decade before the exponential growth got to significant numbers, because you start out doubling little numbers, and finally you get to explosive growth. So Wall Street came back around the year 2000, a few years later, and said, gee, it hasn't changed everything. It hasn't changed anything. I guess we were wrong, and all the values went the other way. But it continued to progress. People don't use the phrase .com anymore, but the .coms, like Google, which is worth $100 billion, that's $15 billion of real revenue, are actually making progress. And this boom-bust psychology is actually an accurate harbinger of dramatic changes in the future. It happened in telecommunications. It even happened with the railroads. Intellectual property is growing exponentially. Education is growing exponentially because we are destroying jobs at the bottom of the skill ladder, and we're adding new jobs at the tops of the skill ladder. The new jobs are actually greater in number than the jobs we're destroying. They pay 8 times as much in constant dollars. We had about 30% of the population with jobs in 1870. We have about 50% today, and they pay far higher wages. But the skill ladder is moving up. So we were investing more in education. We had 60,000 college students in 1870. We have 6 million today. We spend 10 times as much in constant dollars per capita on K through 12. And I mentioned solar energy. I'll just show you this quickly, but this is a logarithmic scale. This represents a smooth doubling in the amount of solar energy every 2 years for the last 20 years. And what's driving it is reductions in the cost of solar, which is coming down dramatically because of the application of nanotechnology. So let me show you quickly another technology we put together. We created the first large vocabulary speech recognition that was commercially marketed in the 80s. It's been in continual development. It's now with a company called Nuance, which used to be Kurzweil Computer Products. So we took the latest version of that. We developed the first speech synthesis for the reading machine for the blind in the 1970s. That's been in continuous development. We took the latest version of that, and we added language translation and created a translating telephone. This is a translating telephone that I just demonstrated to you for print documents, because it can read in any language and translate it into any language. But this is now from speech to speech, and this will be a routine service to your cell phone in a few years. This is a demonstration, comma.
Dies ist eine Demonstration
Of a prototype of a quote translating end quote telephone. Period.
von einem Prototyp eines übersetzenden Telefons.
Within a few years, comma,
Innerhalb einiger Jahre
we will be able to talk to anyone, comma,
wir werden fähig sein, zu jemandem zu reden,
regardless of their language. Period.
ohne Rücksicht auf ihre Sprache.
The rain in Spain, comma,
La pluie en Espagne.
stays mainly in the plain. Period.
Reste dans la plaine principalement.
Merci pour votre attention. Period.
Thank you for your attention.
So let me make a few conclusions from all of that data. As we start the next decade, computers are going to start to disappear. People already lose their nano iPods in their pocket. They'll be woven in our clothing. They'll be in our belt buckle. They'll be online all the time. We'll solve this problem that people like large displays on the one hand, but they also are starting to watch movies on devices this size by putting them in our eyeglasses. There are already devices that can create a virtual display that hovers in air. There are new prototypes I've tried where you can move your head and it detects your head motion and the virtual display stays constant. That virtual display can then actually take over your entire visual field of view and put you in the display in a full immersion three-dimensional virtual reality environment. We'll have augmented real reality, so as you look at someone, there'll be little pop-ups in your visual field of view, remind you it's their birthday next Tuesday, remind you what their name is. That would find that very helpful. There'll be effective language translation, subtitles on the world when people are talking. Search engines will be listening to your conversation. They won't wait to be asked. They'll see if you get stuck on something that you, kind of like a friend, it'll pop up. Reminder, the name of that actress you're stumbling on is such and so. No, you got that wrong, and it will help you through the day. As we get to 2029, these technologies will really be mature. Technologies like biotechnology and nanotechnology, they'll be millions of times more powerful than today. We'll have completed the reverse engineering of the human brain. And we'll create very intelligent machines, but it won't be an alien invasion of intelligent machines to displace us. It will augment our own intelligence. These nanobots that are going inside our bodies, keeping us healthy from inside, will also go inside the brain through the capillaries and interact with our biological neurons. If that sounds futuristic, I'd point out there's already cyborgs walking around that have computers in their brains, like Parkinson's patients, where there's a computer, not blood cell size yet, pea-sized, but it replaces the biological neurons destroyed by the disease. The latest generation actually allows you to download new software to the computer inside your brain from outside the patient. That's today. Take what we can do today and realize that these technologies will be 1 billion times more powerful in 25 years, 100,000 times smaller in key feature size, and you get some idea of what will be feasible. And I'll leave you with one last trend. This progress, which I've alluded to already, has resulted from the linear growth of health and medicine. Before it was an information technology. Now that it is an information technology, it's going to progress at an exponential pace. According to my models, we'll be adding more than a year every year, not just to infant life expectancy, but to your remaining life expectancy each year. So as you go forward a year, your life expectancy will move on away from you. So if you can hang in there for another 15 years, we may get to see the remarkable century ahead. Thank you very much.
Folks, thank you all for attending our 5th annual Davinci Luncheon and Colloquium. On behalf of the Board of Directors, both the Davinci Society and the University of Advancing Technology, we'd like to extend thank you, and also to Mr. Kurzweil for this wonderful induction. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful weekend, folks.